This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hello and welcome to Daughterhood, the podcast. I am your host, Roseanne Corcoran, Daughterhood Circle Leader and Primary Caregiver. Daughterhood is the creation of Ann Tumlinson, who has worked on the front lines in the healthcare field for many years and has seen the multitude of challenges caregivers face. Our mission is to support and build confidence in women who are managing their parents' care. Daughterhood is what happens when we put our lives on hold to take care of our parents. We recognize this care is too much for one person to handle alone. We want to help you see your efforts are not only good enough, they are actually heroic. Our podcast goal is to bring you some insight into navigating the healthcare system, provide resources for you as a caregiver, as well as for you as a person, and help you know that you don't have to endure this on your own. Join me in Daughterhood. As a senior living expert, Bradbury has helped thousands of families make educated and informed decisions as they navigate the world of senior living and senior healthcare. Based on her 25 years of real-world experience, Star's book, Successfully Navigating Your Parents' Senior Years, offers a comprehensive guide that walks families through developing a flexible, proactive plan that focuses on keeping loved ones independent for as long as possible, no matter their age. In our conversation, Star shares examples of how to talk to resistant parents who will not discuss their condition or their future plans, making those plans, aging in place, differences between life care communities, assisted living, and skilled nursing, and how to decipher it all. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Star, I loved your book. Really informative, clear, and concise. And in your book, you state, and I quote, "It is not a guessing game about if a parent's health will fail or if they will eventually no longer be able to live independently. It is when. The statistics don't lie, and more parents will need long-term care or will develop dementia than will die in their sleep." End quote. But when your parent won't even acknowledge there needs to be a plan or even have a discussion about a plan, what do you do?
That is such a good question. And it's a tough question. And I'm going to give a lot of different ways to think about this. And hopefully you can apply it, dear listeners, to your own situation, meaning because I've been in senior living 25 years and I've helped thousands of families, I do know that there's a spectrum, because you could be talking to someone whose parents are in their 60s, Roseanne, which is ideal,
Yes.
really young, before there's any hint of any kind of future problems. Or you could be talking with so many of people my age who have parents in their 90s.
Right.
And some are doing great. I mean, they're like the role model for how to age successfully. And some are not, of course, at that age. And so I want to stress that the time to start these conversations are gently and early. And I even say in my book, in my experience, you would think, Roseanne, that the older someone is, that the more reasonable they would be about talking about things that are a little closer. And they're not.
No, not at all.
They're just not. And so the older people get, the more resistant they become. I have learned that from my own personal experience with my parents who divorced and remarried. So I had two sets of parents. They're all gone. I learned just as much about what not to do and the gaps in my own wisdom and knowledge, because this was quite a few years ago. I look back and I go, I wish I'd read my book. I wish I'd had that book
Right.
about so many things. Like, yeah, I could have done that a little differently. And they certainly could have. And I didn't have the skills and the knowledge and experience I have now, which has compelled me, became my obsession to finish this book to help other people be in a position to make better educated and informed decisions. Because as I say, you don't know what you don't know. But let's go back to resistant parents.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come up with a framework within the book that people could apply over and over and over again. So that means something simple but profound. And I feel that these two principles I've put forward in the book are both. So principle number one is starting with this question for anybody out there listening. How can I maximize and prolong my parents' independence for the longest possible time? And we'll get to principle two later, but let's focus on this. And why do I bring this up now? Because I've seen so many families get off on the wrong foot in the very, very beginning when parents become resistant if they think, you're not going to tell me what to do.
Exactly.
You're my kid. Don't think for a second that I have to listen to you and I'm going to do it my way.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to dig their heels in, which becomes truer and truer. The needier they are, you would think that wasn't true, but as I said, it is. And so if let's say the critical thing with applying that principle in this situation, because it can be applied in multiple situations, if I were someone trying to open this conversation with a parent and I wasn't sure if they were going to be resistant or not, but it's far safer to assume they will be.
Mm-hmm.
It might start out very softly, like you don't say, gee, mom and dad, let's work on your independent plan. They would look at you like you were crazy, depending on the situation, right? Especially if you're trying to start it young. So I like to say, keeping that in your mind, you might start the conversation with, hey, I'm thinking that you're going to be retiring soon. That's how early we're going to start these conversations. And I got to have a couple of questions for you because I have friends whose parents are retiring and I see that they're sitting down. Whether it doesn't matter if that's true. I have friends who are having conversations with their parents and I kind of think that maybe that would be a good thing for us. Could we just sit down sometime? You don't even say, let's do it now. Okay, you're giving them plenty of prep time to get used to this. And questions that I like to ask are, what kind of lifestyle do you kind of want during retirement? Super soft question, nothing confronting. Or are you thinking about relocating when you retire? Do you want to stay in blah, 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 blah? Or have you thought about moving closer to me or my sis or brother, blah, blah? What about staying in your home? Are you, there's this thing I keep hearing about called aging in place. That seems to be popular these days. Boy, do I have an issue with that, but we'll get to that later.
Okay.
Do you want to age in place and stay in this home that's 2 stories with all the bathrooms and bedrooms upstairs? You don't say that. Don't say that. I'm just sort of, that's your quiet thinking.
Yep.
And are you considering any retirement communities? Maybe we should go look at some. There's some beautiful then there are, oh my gosh, resort style retirement. That may or may not be a financial consideration. I'm well aware of that.
Right.
But if it is, I would bring that up. These are all super soft, beginning to open a conversation. You are nowhere close to saying, do you have any money to pay for that long-term care? You are nowhere close to saying, gosh, I assume you've done that living will and healthcare surrogate thing. I do have a plan for introducing that though. And so you start out with very, very non-confronting, nothing to do with changes in healthcare. But can you see, Roseanne, how much easier it is to introduce this when it isn't relevant yet?
Right. I like to call it feeding a baby deer.
Oh, I like that.
You're approaching like, right. No sudden moves. We're not talking about anything major.
Or a grizzly bear if your father's
or a grizzly
really,
bear. Yep.
Or mom.
We're just talking here. We're just talking about it. Like we're not doing anything today. It's, you plant the seed and then you go back to it.
Mm-hmm. Or especially if their parents live in another state. How about next time over Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas. How about can we actually make a plan to sit down and talk about some of this stuff? I just want to get ahead of the curve. And
Right.
then here's part B. You make it about you. You're not talking about them. You go, I know I'm a worrywart. I know you tell me that I shouldn't worry. And, Mom, Dad, I just do. I can't help it. Maybe I shouldn't. And maybe there's not going to be, but, could you just humor me? Not them.
Right.
Could you humor me? Could we make a plan when I see you in blah, blah months to sit down, and when we're all there, then you start involving, if you're lucky enough to have siblings I was about to say that you want to involve, but that is a mistake. Even if you don't think they're going to be helpful, even if you think they're resistant, do not try to make a plan, because I've seen parents divide the kids.
Yeah.
If you know you're going to have a particularly difficult time, I would not exclude anybody, because that's a big problem waiting to happen that will blow up in the future. And you'll see parents dividing siblings and siblings dividing each other. And then it gets really nasty. And so my advice is, if you already know you've got one of those families, then you hire, I know this sounds a little extreme, but I've seen it work, a mediator, a skilled mediator, someone, for example, that is a geriatric care manager or case manager, or somebody out of the organization I'm a member of, the Aging Life Care Association, ALCA. You can go to their website, put in your zip code, and up pops everybody in your area that could be qualified, and they list their bios and their background and their training. So depending on what you need, do you need a care manager, or do you need somebody with more of a social work background to function as a mediator? And again, in a very soft way, you would never use that term mediator.
No.
You would say something like this, we live in so many different states, and this is turning into a complex problem. I really think I've decided to go ahead and ask Susie Q, who is with the Aging Life Care Association and really skilled, to help inform us about what our options might be.
Mm-hmm.
And then you give
Mm-hmm.
that person a heads up. We already have some differences of opinion about where mom should go,
Right.
where dad should go. And so that's there's so many things to talk about when it comes to approaching parents and how to get on their good side.
Well, yeah. And it's hard too, because it's change.
Yes.
And nobody likes change, and nobody likes transitions. And to think about, oh my gosh, I've lived here for however many years, and I have to, pack my things, and I have to go through all of my things, and I don't want to do it. And I get that that's why it's important to start early, because the later it goes and the less people feel well, it's harder to even think about that. But that's the reality that is part of this. It's that fear of change. And what are you doing? Oh,
Absolutely.
and by the way, I'm fine, and you don't know what you're talking about. So that's all, that's all gets thrown into the mix.
Because I spent so many years in senior living where people were at that point of making a decision, do I move? And I worked in assisted living, memory care, and life care for 25 years.
Okay.
So I saw people, and you will get a kick out of this. They put themselves on my wait list for the community I was working in, especially the life care community.
Mhm.
And so their names would come up in the time frame they indicated. Now that I'm ready to move in 5 years. Boom, 5 years pass in a flash. I call up Mrs. Smith and say, Mrs. Smith, exciting news. Your name is up for that fabulous apartment that's really hard to get. And your name is up, and, what's going on in your life? Are you ready to make this move? And 9 out of 10 times they would say, what? Really? It's been 5 years? Oh, well, the
Mhm.
famous, I'm not ready yet. And that is a phrase you're going to hear from parents. I'm just not ready yet. And then you know what my answer back used to be? And write this down, listeners. What are you waiting for? What is going to make you ready?
Wow.
And then you don't say anything. Be quiet. Let that sink in and wait for them to answer.
Mhm.
Because at some point you're going to say, Mom, I'm just worried. I know maybe you're not worried, but I just see that if you wait to make this change, It could be a change to assisted living, harder discussion. It could be a change out of a big house that's just too much for both your parents. Not to mention if one has died already and they're in that house 50 years. I've seen, Roseanne, do you know how many people I've seen say, I'm just not ready, I'm just not ready, I'm just not ready, I'm just not ready. Fast forward 5 years, 10 years, and they can't do it. Like you said,
Yep.
it's too much.
Yep.
So here's what I tell people. When people used to say to me, well, when do you think is the ideal time? And I would say, before you're ready,
Yeah.
before you think you should. And that's the hard part.
Yeah, that's hard.
And like you said, the key to aging successfully, not only for our parents, but our future older selves, is to be willing to be adaptable, willing to change, and accept that it's inevitable. And don't put your head in the sand. Your decisions should be based on, guess what? Principle number one, maximizing your independence
Yeah.
for the longest possible time. That's the key to getting your parents, because you know what I would say, not those soft questions, but when you've moved a little further along in this conversation,
Yeah.
especially if you saw little red flags that might indicate that this is a more relevant conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I would say something like, Mom and Dad, I just want to have a more serious conversation with you about aging in place or what your plan is over the next 3 to 5 years. Is it a true statement for me to say that you want to stay as independent as you possibly can for as long as you can? Now, when you say that, Roseanne, can
Mm-hmm.
you imagine any parent not agreeing with you?
No, but I can imagine yeah, and it's going to be fine. I'll be fine. I can
So,
imagine
but
that
remember,
coming
this is
back.
the opener. This is the soft opener.
Okay.
And then you say, well, I'm so glad we're in agreement because I, as your adult daughter, want that for you too. And obviously, that makes sense for both of us. You probably don't want to depend on me because I'm still working full time and I have kids and I live in another state. You fill in the blank, whatever's
Yep.
relevant for you. And I understand and respect that you want to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. And however, try to avoid the word but.
Right.
And that's what we both want. And I can also see that that might be a little challenging in your 2-story house on acres out in the country, on the farm, in the city. My father and stepmother died in New York City. I
Oh,
can
wow.
tell you from experience that a big urban city is not a nice place or a kind place for older people. So,
Right.
you can fill in the blank. I worry about you maintaining your independence in the city environment, in this rural environment, an hour from the nearest hospital. I want you to be independent, but I can't drop everything and come and take care of you if you need it. And I'm not saying that I see that you need it, but we can all agree that things can happen unexpectedly. And that's when you say, think about Aunt Betty. Now you start bringing in examples that they cannot ignore.
Right.
Didn't you tell me your neighbor fell walking to the mailbox last week and broke her hip?
Mm-hmm.
We can't control accidents. We can't control things beyond our control. So I'm asking you, what would you do if Dad died? And now we start to get a little heavy. I had a
Right.
conversation with a client, Roseanne, last week. Wonderful people. Oh, and boy, did they have a beautiful home. I mean, it was quite lovely on several acres. It was like an oasis.
Oh, wow.
And they're planners. And I was talking with them about aging successfully.
Okay.
So here was the tough question at one point. So, Sue, if John died first, your husband of 50 years, would you want to stay in this house, this beautiful, lovely home? She said, no, I wouldn't. And I turned to him, John, if Sue died first, would you want to stay in this house? And he thought, he had to think for a minute. I'm
Mm-hmm.
pretty sure they hadn't had that conversation yet. And he said, no, I don't
Wow.
think so. And I said, well, that means that we need to talk about a plan B. They already had a good plan A. Now, what do I mean by that? Gosh, they'd already modified their home, completely redone the bathrooms with safety bars, no obstruction, wheelchair accessible, already 1 story, luckily. They had done everything they needed to. They had done all the medical and financial work already, living wills, healthcare surrogates, wills, power of attorney, everything I would go, that list of things I mention in the book for the 5 pillars of aging successfully. There's a long list. They already had talked about how they were going to pay for long-term care, one of the 5 pillars.
Wow.
And they were already very connected to their community. And they had a pretty good support system, which is critical. A daughter in town, available and willing, and a son-in-law available and willing to be their advocates. But they also saw, based on our conversation, that, maybe we won't be in this house forever. Then what? And so that opened the door to further conversations about what alternatives might be. That's where we started talking about communities in this area, because they do want to stay here.
Right.
So,
well, and that's all part of it too.
yes.
That realization, and that it's almost the ability to let yourself see a different side, a different
I
opportunity.
just love that expression.
Thank you.
Let yourself see.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to write that down. I'm learning from you. Because
Thank you.
I did a presentation on Sunday. I had a book launch, and I was talking about how people put their head in the sand, and I literally put my hands in front of my face and went, la, 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 la. If I don't
Yes.
think about it, I don't want to see.
Right.
But I'm inviting people with this book, let yourself see, and then make a plan, because it's not if, it's when. That part in the book where I say that my friend gave me this expression that after you retire, there's the go-go years.
I love that.
I
Yes,
love that. I
love
borrowed that from him.
Yeah.
Where you think, God, my dad's golfing 5 times a week, and they just went on some trip, and they went on this jazz cruise, and they're on the go, and they're traveling in their RV. Okay, great. Those are the go-go years. But eventually something's going to happen, and you're going to have the slow go years. Now you're not traveling so much. It's too hard. Something's happened to one of you or to yourself. And then that's then followed by the slow go years, or the no go. You are not going. Something has happened, either age, or usually it isn't just age. I'm not a believer that age is necessarily an indicator that you're going to fail.
No.
But I do believe that statistically, you better be prepared. Plan for the best, but be prepared for the worst.
Exactly. Because sticking your head in the sand doesn't help anything, and it's part of this this belief system of well, I'll deal with it when it happens, and it's like no, it's too late. It's too late to deal with it, because then you're in a panic. Right. And then you're making a decision that you're forced into, and not one that you're choosing.
And there is another key, Roseanne. That's another key. If you can help your parents see, first of all, everybody wants to maximize their independence for the longest possible time. But if they can see that the key to that is talking about what their ideal plan is, and working towards a plan that's going to allow them to age successfully and have choices. Because I would say to my, especially let's say I have a difficult dad, you've always been a planner, and the most difficult ones can be. But let's just say you've always been a planner. Or if that's not true, you can say you've always been in control. Oh, you've always been such a good decision maker, such a good whatever, fill in whatever is genuine for you. I'm not suggesting that you BS your parents, but because they'll know. So it has to be genuine, but you're going to say you've always been the decision maker or in control. Why would you give that up now?
Right.
You are giving up the ability to make these decisions for yourself by abdicating this to, well, whatever happens, we'll deal with it then. No. You know what happens when you arrive at the hospital without a living will? Did you happen to watch that video I quote in my book? Oh my God. When I watched that, I was in shock. I thought, I even say, do not show this to your parents unless you have resorted to everything and you're pulling out the fear card. And they're like, no, I just don't want to do it. Someone will make a decision for me. Boy, they watch that and they're going to get motivated, but only pull that card out as a last resort. It's a pretty rough video. It's made by a doctor who's worked in emergency rooms, and he goes, yeah, you know what we have to do? Torture you until you die. It's brutal, but they're required if you don't have a living will, Roseanne, as well.
To just
keep
keep
treating.
treating.
Yeah,
Keep
it's
treating.
not pretty. And he is very clear about that. But, I really believe the majority of people are reasonable. The other thing you can say, if your parents won't do living wills,
Mhm.
and is because you know what? This is where you can pull out the guilt card with the assumption that your parents care about you, and most do, and love you as a child, adult child, and most do,
Mhm.
and they don't want to be a burden. Most do not. Here's what you say. Do you understand what it would do to me if I'm trying to guess at what you want when you can't speak for yourself? Do you understand? I would be guessing if you won't have these conversations with me. Dad, Mom, don't make me guess. I will have to live with that the rest of my life. Please let me know what you really want so that I can make confident, clear decisions and choices when you can't speak for yourself. And as your healthcare proxy or backup or helping mom or helping dad make those decisions, how can we do that if we don't know?
Yeah.
So again, in general, Roseanne, put it back on yourself. I'm the one that thinks you're going to have a car accident.
Right. Right.
Everyone can relate to the fact that don't car accidents happen all the time. Nobody plans for those. So you keep making it about you. And then if you're really resistant, you go, guess what I did today? I did my own living will.
Yeah. Here, you want me to show it to you?
Correct. Right.
How about we talk about mine? Well,
Right.
because it's more than do you want water and do you want
Yes.
antibiotics?
Far
It's
more.
more than that. And the hard part with that is you're often left to doing it by yourself, which isn't fair either.
Oh, good point. Now listen, almost wherever your listeners are, there's hospice organizations or senior centers that do workshops, free workshops on what's called supportive decision making
Okay.
with trained people to help you fill those forms out. And especially, and this has become such a challenge, Roseanne, for solo seniors. And I always joke with people, yeah, well, guess what? You could have kids and it still doesn't help.
Right.
Because why? They live in another country. They're not interested. You're estranged from them. They have addiction issues. You would never ask them. They're mentally ill. I mean, I wish I didn't have to say all this, but it's
It's the
true.
truth.
It's
Yep.
the truth. So solo seniors, when you look at all the people who have kids but couldn't ever ask them for many reasons, good and bad, then that's a whole bunch of people. That's millions and millions of people. So there's all kinds of ideas about supporting solo seniors to find somebody who can be a reliable healthcare surrogate. Now, remember I mentioned ALCA, Aging Life Care Association. There's probably not many, but a few that might be willing, especially if they knew you and you had already developed a little bit of relationship with them, that would function in that role for you. And we all know it's a heavy role.
It is a heavy role because even when you do know the wishes and you still have to
Yes.
make those decisions, it's still hard. And you
My own
still second
stepfather.
guess yourself.
Yeah, my own stepfather. My mother was already in skilled nursing. She had so many health issues, and she had vascular dementia and congestive heart failure and heavy, heavy smoker and drinker. And but my stepfather was a saint, and he cared for her for 10 years. And finally, she fell 3 times in one day, called 911 3 times.
Oh my
And
goodness.
he couldn't lift her anymore. He had all kinds of health issues himself. So she went to the hospital. When the hospital went to discharge her, the sisters, me included, said, "You cannot send her home. You just can't. It's going to kill my stepfather."
Right.
So they placed her in skilled nursing, and fast forward about 8 months, and she had a massive stroke mid-sentence, and Bill was there. He was right there with her by the grace of God. And he was with her and he held her hand. And of course, they called 911 because it doesn't matter, facility will. Having run one, I already knew that. But he had the courage, Roseanne, as her healthcare surrogate, to say, no, nope, I know what her wishes are. I'm going to have to let her go.
Wow.
And that's courage. And he did.
Yeah.
He wouldn't let them resuscitate her.
Wow.
So I've just had so many personal and professional examples of the power of having a plan.
Yeah. Because going to the hospital, it's a whole different it's a whole different set of
rules.
because they're there to save you. They're there to save you.
Yeah.
And they're going to do whatever they can to save you.
They did with my
Wow.
dad. My dad lived in New York City. My sister, I have a twin sister. She's in Texas. I'm here in Florida. We get that call that I start the book with in the middle of the night. Your
Yep.
dad's just been rushed to the hospital. By the time we got up, and it's always a Memorial Day weekend. It's always a holiday weekend. It's,
Yeah.
it's like, okay. So, no, it was such a mess. And he didn't go to his regular hospital. No, the ambulance took him to another hospital. It was a faith-based hospital. They put him on a respirator. By the time we get up there, as fast as we could, he's in this strange hospital. It's faith-based. He's on a respirator, and we knew his wishes. He would never have wanted, and he had advanced Parkinson's, dementia, permanent catheter. I could just go on. And we had to say, no, this isn't what he wanted. Do you know that we had to sign release forms to pull him off the respirator? And they made us sign all kinds of liability release forms, and we had to pay ourselves for an ambulance to transport him to a hospice hospital.
I believe it's a whole thing, but it circles back to no one wants to talk about these things. Nobody wants to talk about
pleading with you.
Aging and dying and being sick and needing care, and nobody wants to talk about it. And then we're in these positions where you just want to scream because it's like, oh
Yes.
my goodness, can't we just? And it's so frustrating. And I don't know how we change that. I mean, listen, this is fantastic.
I believe we can. I'm really
Okay.
committed to this. That's my soapbox.
Okay.
And my whole book is a framework and a guide and a step-by-step hand-holding
Right.
guide to take people on this journey of the whole first section of the book is developing a plan.
Yep.
The second section is location, 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 because there's two things that indicate how you're going to age successfully. One is how strong is your support system, and two is where do you choose to age? Are you aging in place? Well, that will only work, Roseanne, if you have a good, strong support system. Not alone.
Right.
Or
Right.
looking at retirement communities or life care communities or building a tiny house in your backyard for mom and or dad or co-housing or a roommate situation. I mean, I have lots of things that I cover. The
Yes, you
third
do.
section is when your parents need more help and care, helping people understand what is assisted living, what are the requirements to get into assisted living, will my mother even qualify? Skilled nursing, how do you vet these communities? How do you find out what agencies oversee these communities and how do they stack up?
Yeah.
Their rating, would you not take your mom to that one?
Well,
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it is so informative and you literally lay out everything. But in talking about, if we can go through a couple of those, in talking about aging in place, we'll start with aging in place. You're relocating and or downsizing, which
Okay.
is an incredible feat. And then you have to especially talk about the fact that Medicare doesn't pay for in-home care or adult day services. Like
Correct.
that has to be part of the conversation.
It does. I mean, you can't get around, and I hope I addressed this consistently in my book,
I believe you did.
about the financial stress
Mhm.
of paying for any kind of care. So initially, there's no question that having somebody come into your parents' home, when you see that this will maintain their independence. So let's say you have someone who says, I don't need anybody. I'm fine. I don't need any help. And here's what I would say. Well, God, Mom, if somebody was willing to bring somebody into my house and help with cooking and cleaning, I sure would love it. Why don't we just try it? Just try 2 mornings a week. Somebody come and clean up for you and make a couple of meals and put them in the freezer and maybe drive you to grocery shopping and do some errands because I can't. I'm working, and I know you're getting concerned about driving. Now I'm throwing out a lot of ideas here, but whatever's relevant to your situation.
Right.
So I would look at starting with the least amount of help and the least expensive, which is privately hiring somebody, which has its pluses and minuses, but it would be less expensive. Somebody from your church, somebody from your sorority, somebody from your service club that you're involved with, somebody that you know and trust, underline trust,
Yeah.
that could come in a couple of times a week. Or the advantages of going through home care and hiring a home aide or companion. That means that if they can't show up, somebody else will. There's pluses and minuses on both sides, but starting out small with just providing that care and helping your parents, again, realize this will help you stay independent longer and getting them on your side with that. But when you asked about who pays for what, I have a whole chapter on paying for long-term care and trying to educate people on what Medicare will pay for and Medicaid. And also, if I could stress one thing, please do not assume that you won't qualify for Medicaid. The rules change from state to state, and they've changed a lot in the last few years. If you're a couple, you can keep your home. If there's a couple, you can keep your home for the person that's still in home.
Right. The community
And
spouse.
Medicaid might still help pay for either home and community-based care, which they're trying to expand that program in some states. Or if you're a veteran, there's tons of programs that would help pay for home care or even modifications.
Right.
And so don't make assumptions. And if you do think your parents will eventually qualify for Medicaid, do not spend all their assets down. That is a misnomer. That is a myth. Go and get educated advice from a qualified Medicaid counselor who can help you plan for the eventuality of Medicaid. But that planning needs to take place 2, 3, 4 years before the need, before you're going and trying to get them on Medicaid. Don't wait. Don't spend all their money or sell their house. Go get educated about what your options are.
People don't realize it because we don't talk about it, but they also don't realize it because it's so foreign and it's a different part of the healthcare field.
It isn't. For example, a lot of the Medicaid rules allow you to, and this I didn't know and I learned recently, pay for a caregiver that's in your family. So if you could show that you can use some of your assets over the last 3 or 4 years to help keep you in home and pay for that person, some of those assets are exempt from consideration or from the look back, the famous look back.
But it's all so confusing. And you really do need a qualified Medicaid counselor to walk you through it because every state's different. I feel like every month they change an idea or a regulation. And there's so much misinformation out there.
Correct.
That this is one of those instances where you really do need to hire somebody to help you with this.
Do you know, Roseanne, that if you apply for Medicaid and you screw up the application, there's a rule that says you can't reapply for 2 years. So what happens is people don't know what they're doing and they just assume I can muddle through this and it's clear as mud, as I say in the book. And then one little thing, one little mistake, and you're booted out. Now you've got 2 more years to try to figure out what to do with mom or dad, and they've run out of money. Yeah. So that's why you need to be which brings in principle number 2. I call it just-in-time senior planning.
I love that.
You're looking at a 3 to 5 year window. 3 to 5 year window. There's no point in planning for 10 years out because guess what? The situation you're in with your parents will be drastically different. Now, there's room for what I call continuous improvement. You're constantly saying, do I have a good plan? Because now I see that mom just fell. And now I see her walking around on a walker or holding on to everything. She never really recovered from that fall. Yes. And this staying in place in home is looking less and less like a good option for her safety and independence. So now you have to come up with a new plan, but stay focused on that 3 to 5 year window.
Yeah, because it's you can't plan that far out. It's silly.
No, but people try.
Yeah, you just can't.
Or they worry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because you get into that, when you're talking about going to an assisted living community or a life care community, you're talking about a lot of money So then you're playing that math problem. Here's how much money I have.
Right.
Here's how
Right.
many months I'm going to be able to buy. And you can't, it doesn't sync up. And some of these communities, they're asking for more money than you've paid for your mortgage.
True.
And
God knows that's true.
that's the flip side. So if you say it, if you're looking at this and you think, well, okay, I can't stay in this house. Okay, I'm going to downsize, or maybe I'll just move into assisted living. Okay, well, it can be $5,000 a month.
Oh, if you ask me right now in Florida, in my town,
Mhm.
what's the average cost for assisted living? And this is probably true nationally, 5,000 to 7,000. Now you can
Yeah.
find less. And by the way, let me tell your listeners, if you want to see what the going rate is for home care companion, home health, assisted living, skilled nursing, go to the Genworth cost of care survey. Just put that in Google, which will allow you to look up the cost of home care, home health care, assisted living, skilled nursing for your zip code.
Wow.
And did you hear me say that the other adjective, besides how wonderful this website is also horrifying? Because it has a cost calculator, Roseanne. I tell people, sit down, because you can move that little cost calculator out 5 years, 10 years,
Oh,
15 years, and look at what it's going to cost if you're 60 and you're trying to figure out what it might cost when you're 80, or for
really?
your parents.
Wow.
It is startling, but it's powerful. There are a
Wow.
lot of people in the senior living industry that look at that Genworth for information. And let's say you're trying to decide whether mom and dad should move closer to you in Tennessee,
Right.
or closer to your brother in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Well, I was shocked to find out that Louisiana actually was far better off than Florida with their Medicaid home care programs.
How about that?
And the cost of care was less and more accessible. So if
Really?
yes, I was shocked. Florida is not exactly liberal in so many ways, but especially in turning down Medicaid. Everybody knows that they've said, no, we're not going to increase Medicaid in Florida, much less home and community-based care, which is a federal program, which I hope and pray we'll see an increase in over time to help those who really need the financial help.
Yeah.
Anyway, that Genworth is a really good website, and it will show you the variation in cost of care from state to state or even city to city. And it's free, of course, and they update this every 2 or 3 years.
That's fantastic.
But it is frightening. The cost of care is frightening.
Yeah.
And so if you know that your parents don't have assets or haven't planned for long-term care, it's even more important to start these conversations with your entire family, where if there was a heartbreaking article this past weekend in the New York Times that followed a family where you saw both the emotional toll,
Yeah.
with an emotional breakdown of the daughter, emotional toll that it took on her as the primary caregiver, and the financial ruin of this small family struggling, living paycheck to paycheck and trying to meet her father's needs and her own needs and her daughter. It was a heart-wrenching. And there's thousands, millions of people out there like that.
Right. Because this is the reality. The reality is nobody can afford long-term care. We can't. It's impossible unless you're the very, very rich.
I know.
And you can't afford it. So as parents that are in this situation, you look at it and say, why am I going to leave my house? It's probably, if it's not paid off, it's close to being paid off. It's where I'm comfortable. It's what I know. And I don't want to leave here to go over there of what I don't know. And by the way, how am I paying for that? And all of that comes into play, which makes it a very real issue. It's a real problem.
It does.
And it's hard to try to work through.
It's very, very hard. And so let's say you had a family, and let's just use the most typical scenario. Mom is widowed.
Mm-hmm.
She's still living in the house. They could be divorced, but you have one parent, and you don't live near them at all. And the only asset they have is their Social Security, maybe a small pension, and they've paid for their house. And I talk about this and how are you going to pay for long-term care? And even though I'm not a fan of reverse mortgages, if I thought that my parent absolutely was either too sick to move or was just so entrenched that they wouldn't, you might consider that. But the problem is, are they going to outlive that money? Now, when my stepfather, I couldn't manage alone anymore, I sold his house to pay for his care and memory care and assisted care. And I just said my prayers that the money would last. And you could say, by God's grace, it did, which was also the sad part. He passed away. But I really nurtured and protected that money and made it last for as long as I possibly could. And sometimes you just have to do that. And you can't know the future. And you've got to make the decision you can at the time and accept it's the best decision that you can. Now, going back to my example, the only problem with a reverse mortgage is if they do need assisted living. And remember now, neither Medicare, unless it's a Medicaid waiver, and that's too complicated to get into. But Medicaid is generally never, or Medicare, going to pay for assisted living. If you knew your mom was going to qualify and you'd already qualified them for Medicaid, you could go through the money, keep them in their home for as long as possible, knowing that when that money ran out, your next choice was going to be skilled nursing on Medicaid. Now, that's a tough decision in and of itself. But these are kinds of decisions people are making, because if you are trying to compare 24/7 home care, Roseanne, nobody can afford that. If you're talking about Medicaid, that's going to be at home 24/7, 120,000, 150,000 a year.
Absolutely.
If you're talking about 24/7 care. Now, the other thing is, if let's say mom says, I'm not moving, I'm not moving, I'm not moving. Sometimes you have to wait for an event, and you pray that that event is just enough to get her to consider moving closer to you, where there's a support system. If you can't move close to your mom or dad, or you can't move in with them, which we know plenty of adult children have, you brought your own mom to live with you. And not everybody can do that.
Nope.
So let's say they're far away from you and they just won't move. Then you read my chapter on managing long distance care for your parents. Do everything that you can. Understand that's not going to be, may not be enough. And you hope that whatever event happens, a fall, that you say, Mom, please, I can't move there. I can't leave my kids, my husband, my job. But I do want to move you. I can only help you if you let me help you.
Right.
And this is assuming there's not dementia involved. If there's dementia, then I hope you're the power of attorney, and then you become the parent and you make the decision.
Right. But and this is why there are so many caregivers, because the options here and the choices here are awful. There are no choices.
It's bad or baddest.
That's it. That's it. And you're going to pay in one way or another. If it's not money, it's your own life, it's your own health. It's this big, huge problem, and it's not getting any better. And it continues to be on this downward slope of, well, here's your choices. You know, you can't pay for in-home care, or you pay for a little bit of in-home care, and then you're doing the caring.
Well, this is where I go back to, and we talked about being adaptable and resilient. I'll tell you a story about a client. She was in her 80s, certainly used to living alone. She'd been divorced for many, many years, and her adult children lived in other states and nowhere near her. And she really wanted to stay in her home. I get it. I understand. But guess what? When her ex-husband died, she lost $600 a month in income that she was absolutely counting on, that she was under the impression, Roseanne, that was a lifetime. It had nothing to do with ending when he died. When they got the divorce, that was part of what she understood the permanent divorce agreement was. And she was rudely awakened when she got the call. Guess what? Your ex-husband passed away and that money is gone. And she was, now she's in her 80s, pretty good health, but she was freaking out. You're not going to go back to work, right?
Mm-mm.
So we brainstormed, and as I said, her house was paid off. And in the end, we came up with this idea. Why? Because she was flexible, Roseanne. She was willing to change. I said, do you have an extra bedroom? Yes. Do you have an extra bathroom? Yes. Would you be willing to get a roommate or an Airbnb?
Right.
So we talked and talked and talked. Here's what she did. Turns out she's a retired nurse, and she hooked up. I helped her connect with the Traveling Nurse Association.
Brilliant.
And rented out her room to nurses that were, especially during COVID.
Yep.
There were a lot of traveling nurses banking because they could by traveling and filling in on staff. And turns out she loved the company. She made more than the $600 a month. She could stop it when she wanted to, if she wanted to go visit her kids for a month in the summer. And it was the perfect solution, no reverse mortgage. So that's why I talk about what could you do? Roommates, and there's actually tons of websites in many parts of the country that help you connect with, I think it was Silver Roommates. I mean, I have the websites listed.
Yes.
But got to be adaptable. Can't say no. Got to think outside the box.
Right.
So I really believe there's creative solutions, if at all possible. I had a friend of mine who became an elderly person's housemate. She was having severe financial problems herself. She'd been let go from her job and things did not work out well for her. She had a greatly reduced rent in a lovely home, helping to provide care for this senior.
Oh.
She had tremendous autonomy. She kept her job, but she had obligations in the morning to help this person out of bed and get them situated and make them a little lunch and then help them in the evening.
Oh, wow.
So I really believe, and it really helped her out for about 2 or 3 years before she could get back on her feet financially.
Oh, that's great.
And she was in her 50s. So I do think we have to get creative for both ourselves and for our parents, meaning ourselves. When you see that you're drowning as a caregiver, you've got to get creative, because I tell caregivers all the time, if you're the one that dies first, and 30% of caregivers die before their loved one, if you're the one that ends up in the hospital first, which nobody likes to think about, the focus is always on the person you're caring for.
Yes.
What good are you going to be? Then what? Your loved one will really be up the creek.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you've got to come up with maybe your time banking, trading future time, or where someone's coming in and giving you a break.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's also so many different ways of when you go to a life care community or assisted living, and they all sell to you. They're selling. It's not about what's best for you. It's what's best for what they're trying to fill. What are the top 3 things we should look for in looking at these communities?
Wow. Well, it reminds me that I want to tell your listeners that there was so much resource information that I wanted to include in the back of my book, that my publisher said, we think your content is more important than the 50 pages of resources. Let's put that on your website for free, which I was happy to agree to.
Okay.
And so even though I have tons of material about questions to ask, and when touring any kind of retirement community, full service or a life care community, a lot of the lists of questions are on my website.
Yep.
Under the resource tab. And there are so many important questions, but let me just think about the top 3. Well, I want to remind your listeners that if your parents could possibly afford a life care community, I'm a huge fan of life care communities.
Really?
But I really am.
Even with that big, heavy upfront cost.
Yes, I know that's true. I mean, I have
Why?
a workshop on why would anybody pay such a high fee?
Yeah.
I was asked that all the time.
Mhm.
And the answer is, well, let's say you're sitting down and talking with your parents about how they're going to pay for long-term care. Right now, there's lots of options on the insurance market that are far beyond your standard life long-term care insurance plan, which I have very mixed feelings about.
Yeah, me too.
But But if your parents can afford it, I would say absolutely before 60 or in the early 60s or between 60 and 65, look at a hybrid policy that's a life insurance policy that also has a component that will pay for long-term care, so that if you never use it, it will act as a life insurance policy for your estate when you die, or should you need long-term care, it will help, dramatically help, pay for long-term care and assisted, skilled, or even home care, or even help pay you to take care of your parents.
Yeah.
So if they're a family of means, look at the hybrid life insurance long-term care policies. There's so many out there that are far more bang for your buck than your standard long-term care annual premium policies. And many of those, very importantly, Roseanne, are not as strict about your health situation. All insurance companies are going to have some sort of health evaluation. I used to joke that if you needed it, well, that's it. You're not going to get it.
No, good luck to you.
You're
Yeah.
you're disqualified for
Yep.
stupid things like high blood pressure or diabetes. That's it. And I'm not joking either. That is a
No,
true
I know.
statement. But some of these hybrid policies are not quite as strict, nor do they have some stricter age restrictions. Don't eliminate because your parents are 80 already. Again, if they're somebody of means,
Yeah, you've got to read the fine print in those
you
two.
do have to read the fine print.
Absolutely.
And I would want I would actually want professional advice, not just the person selling you the policy. Same thing with life care. Life care is a complex beast.
Yeah.
The longest chapter in the book, I think I said, was chapter 7 on life care communities.
Yep.
And because I worked in one for 18 years, I can tell you that I know life care communities forwards and backwards. And while I understand they're not for everybody, first reason is because the entry fees are so high, it eliminates, 95% or something like that of people.
Easily.
However, the reason I like it is because when you move into a life care community and you move into independent living first, ideally, if you should ever need assisted, skilled, or memory care, you have basically moved to a community that has all of those, if they're true life care, on site, and you can transition to whatever level of care you need for as long as you need it, either short-term rehab you would do there, or long-term permanent situation in assisted or skilled. And if you're a couple, that means that level of care is provided for your spouse while you might stay in an independent apartment and you're in the same location. You're not trying to drive at 85 to see your husband who's in assisted living 5-10 miles away. You're right there, and it's all on one site. And what you're doing by paying an entry fee, if you think about it, Roseanne, is you're buying a lump sum long-term care insurance product through your entry fee that's going to guarantee you access when you need it, typically at a vastly discounted cost, much, much less than the market rate. That's why it's appealing if it's affordable. But you have to pass a health assessment and you have to pass a financial assessment, which only makes sense.
Well, because it's very expensive
to get into. And some life care communities have talked to one yesterday, 5-year wait list. They don't even talk to the public. If they have an opening, they just go to their wait list. So if a lot of smart, wealthy people are choosing to go to these communities, you got to ask yourself why.
But and again, it's that if you have the money to do it, you're good.
Yes, not everybody does.
That's and not everybody does. Now, with assisted living, it's a little more accessible. Again, it's still a cost, but you also have to, there are also certain things that you need to do to get into an assisted living. You don't just call and say, I'm coming.
No, once in the facility I ran, somebody like walking, this little man with a suitcase. I'm here. What? My daughter just dropped me off. She thought it was like a hotel. We were just absolutely flabbergasted.
No, it's a process. And what is that process? What does that process usually consist of?
That's a great question. Well, it's a little different state to state, but in Florida, there's a 1823 form. Every state has their own form. And your primary care physician has to fill out this form that is a very thorough list of your health history, your fall history, all your medications, any hospitalizations, your current lab work, and they basically want to see, do you meet the requirements legally based on statutes and that oversee assisted living and rules and regulations from the agency that oversees federally or in your state? Do you meet the requirements to be accepted in an assisted living facility? And the funny thing is, Roseanne, the big concern is that an over-eager assisted living facility cannot accept someone who actually needs skilled nursing.
Right.
They don't want them to, and they won't let you. And so they're basically going to evaluate, aside from all that history I mentioned, your ADLs, activities of daily living, which are dressing, bathing, the big one, making your meals, toileting, and I'm leaving, feeding, being able to make your meals, not necessarily feed yourself literally. And then instrumental activities of daily living. How are you doing with managing your medications, your doctor's appointments, your life? So it's even more than just your initial medical history. It's how are you doing? Where do you need help? And most states have a limit. You can't check all of those boxes. If someone needs help with all of those things, they won't be accepted. Now they're falling into the category of skilled nursing. And I ran an assisted living facility, and sometimes I had to explain, I'm so sorry, but she's still managing in her own home. Yes, but so people wait too long, and then they can't even go to assisted living. They think that's their back pocket. And there's some weird things that will disqualify you. One of the things is, can that person transfer independently on their own?
Oh.
Why would they have that? Because if the place burns down, they can't single-handedly evacuate 50 individual residents. They need to know that those residents could, in an emergency, get up out of their bed if somebody's sort of helping them and getting them out of the building. And so if your parent can't transfer already, and they need help every time they get out of bed or every time they need to go to the bathroom, assisted living is out.
Wow. And I wonder how many people know that.
Probably not a lot.
It makes you think, wow, they're living alone in their houses.
Right.
And that's a little scary.
It is scary, which goes back to principle number 1.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a mom who you see is or dad, going downhill.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no rule that says they can't go together, but typically it's a single person, and typically a woman. I did the assessments. I went into beautiful homes and found, lonely ladies who were living in their bedroom and the kitchen. Forget the rest of the house. And what I'd like to point out to people who say, I'm going to age in place, that's all there is to it. I'm not ever going to assisted living. I'm not ever going to move. Never say never. I have seen people become rejuvenated, reinvigorated, re-engaged in life by leaving a lonely existence in a big house or any house by themselves and move into a community where they suddenly have peers, Roseanne, and colleagues, and the support they need to maintain their independence for longer. Maybe all they need is 3 meals a day. Think of what a burden that is if you're living by yourself and shopping and driving is becoming difficult.
Right.
Or somebody to stand by while they're showering because they fell and they're scared now. Or somebody to help them with their medications. The 2 biggest reasons people end up in the hospital: mismanagement of medications and dehydration. That's serious.
It is very serious. Yeah.
So imagine if you could show your mom that actually moving, would they be happier and get the support they need to live a more fulfilling, higher quality life? That is why I say aging in place will only work if you have a strong support system and you're not isolating yourself and getting lonelier and more detached from your loved ones in your community.
Yeah.
Now, before, you said, I want to say something that's important about Medicare waivers,
Medicaid waivers.
Yeah. In some states, assisted living is paid for through what's called a Medicaid waiver program. The term waiver comes from the fact that the usual non-payment by Medicaid to assisted living is waived And they do pay if placement in assisted living can be shown that it's keeping you out of skilled nursing.
Oh,
But people are forced into skilled nursing who don't really need it because Medicaid will pay for that. And it's sad because they don't need it. They need assisted living.
right.
So it's too hard to try to cover that in this talk.
Yeah.
I do
Yep.
talk about it in the book, but
Yep.
if you're in that position, find out in your state what Medicaid waiver options are. Now, having said that, sometimes they're few and far
Very few
between,
and far between. Yeah,
and it
they
might
really
be a
are.
little rural assisted living,
Yeah.
20 minutes outside of your town. Go and check them out. They can be some of the best ones are the ones where the staff isn't turning over because it's a little smaller town and people stay there and they have great staffing, and don't dismiss those.
Well, what do you look for when you go to these assisted living places, aside from the big chandeliers in the vestibule? What
Well,
do you need
I,
to look
I
for?
I have a list of critical questions, and I would start by, is this for profit or not for profit? Who owns this building?
Mhm.
Who manages this building? Are they two different contracts? Which is pretty typical these days. A real estate investment firm owns the building, then they hire somebody to manage it for them. That's not my preference. Not saying
No.
that's bad, but it is not my preference. My preference is find a smaller assisted living that's even a mom and pop
If you can find them. Yep.
might be better and far less expensive. But find one that's owned and managed by the same corporation. Ideally, they have more invested and they care more, and there's less chance they're going to sell it off in a few years. So then you're going to say after, who owns it, who manages it, how long have they owned you? When you hear, oh, well, I won't mention any corporate names, so and so sold us 3 years ago and before that. And if you hear that facility has been sold over and over, like 3 times in the last 5 years, forget it. That they're off your list. And I'm just starting with the top tier questions. Then you meet the director of the facility. Hi, Mrs. Gonzalez. How long have you been here? 2 months. 2 months? What about the person before you? 2 years. And before that? How about the DON, the director of nursing? So don't even meet the sales staff first.
Mm-mm.
And listen, go and mystery shop them. Go on a weekend when nobody's there. The sales staff's not there, almost never. Neither is the administrator. You're just going to pop right in.
Yep.
And then talk to the families. How long has your mom been here? Are you happy? How is she doing? How's the food? How's the staffing? And then the big question, is all your staff vaccinated? What percentage is not vaccinated? I mean, so, and that's just the very top. And then, of course, does it smell? How's the odor issue? Do people look happy? How's the food? Is there a resident council? I mean, it's a learning curve.
Yeah.
That's why I say, look, go and look at these facilities, not with your parent. Do not go with your parent to begin with. Absolutely not. You narrow it down first. Don't traipse your older parents around to these places. You narrow it down to 1 or 2 and then let them choose if really either are okay.
Okay. I would think that was just anxiety. It just produces anxiety if you're bringing
Oh,
them
yeah. All
around.
you're doing is like watching mom and dad. You're not even listening to what you're supposed to find out. But there's a long list of questions, and I include most of those in my book and then on the website, www.starbradbury.com under the resource tab.
Your information is priceless. It's priceless, Star, honestly. And we've covered a lot, and I'm wondering what, if any, you can say to someone dealing with a resistant parent as a positive, I'm going to leave you with this thought going forward that they can take with them to be like, okay, I know that I've tried this before. I know I've tried to talk to them. I get shut down. They change the subject. They don't want to talk about it. What can you share with them to be like, just, you can do this?
I think I call myself a realistic optimist.
Okay.
And if there was one thing I would say, if you're going to survive this and keep your sanity as a caregiver, you have to be a realistic optimist, meaning don't give up hope with your parents. Keep trying. Start out really gently. And I think that you build your support team. For example, who does your dad respect in their circle? Could you pull that person into the conversation with you? Sometimes hiring an outside person, and I am that person sometimes. I'm not trying to get hired here, but I mean, you bring in an aging life care specialist or a geriatric care manager or a social worker, and then you invite them into the conversation. I can't tell you the number of times that suddenly a light bulb goes off in mom and dad's head when it's not you telling them what you think they should do. There's an automatic pushback. Now you have an expert who has years and years of experience, who's saying, well, in my experience, and somehow the conversation shifts when you bring in an outside person, kind of like what I was suggesting earlier with a mediator.
Right.
It could be, think of that person as the mediator that's going to help that consciousness shift.
Because then you're not the bad guy.
Right. You're not the bad guy. And sometimes you can educate the person you're inviting about what the situation is and what outcome you're hoping for, and just keep focusing on, I know you want to be in control. Yes, I do. I know you want to maintain your independence. Yes, I do. I'm trying to help you do that. And I'm just not convinced that it's not getting a little more help in the home, that it's not considering moving because I see you're lonely and isolated, that it's not moving earlier before there's an event to move closer to me. But it's not easy, Roseanne.
No, it's banging your head on the wall.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating. And then you get to the point where you're like, okay, well, whatever, then good luck to you. And that's not helpful either.
I get that. Well, but you know what? I say this in the book. You have to be ready to step away in some situations and say your prayers for your loved one, and just know something is going to happen that may get their attention and may change their mind. And then you have to just let the past go. Don't show up saying, I told you so.
No.
I mean, God, that would be the end of any hope.
Yeah.
You just dust yourself off, take a couple of deep breaths, show up and say, I'm so sorry that you fell. I'm so sorry that my mother set the apartment on fire. She almost burned down the entire apartment complex. Smoking in bed. I mean, I honestly, yeah, we all have stories. I have some really good ones.
I'm sure.
And so you say to yourself, I've done everything I could. And just knowing as a caregiver that doing what you could to have a plan will give you some peace of mind that you tried. But we don't have control over our lives. There are going to be curveballs. If you've done everything you can and your parents will not agree, you have to step back and wait and be patient and pray that whatever does happen is recoverable. Or then you go to my last section of the book, A Prepared Exit Plan, which actually you should read before your parents pass away.
Yeah.
In a way, it's almost coming to terms with your own mortality, not your parents. What can you do? You can't do everything, and accept that. But do what you can.
A big thank you to Star Bradbury for being my guest today. For more information on Star's book, Successfully Navigating Your Parents' Senior Years, and to check out Star's keynote speeches, workshops, blog, and free resources, visit her website, starbradbury.com. I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Head over to daughterhood.org and click on the podcast section for show notes, including the full transcript and links to any resources and information from today's episode. You can find and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. We are also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Daughterhood the Podcast. Feel free to leave me a message and let me know what issues you may be facing and would like to hear more about. Or even if you just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. Also, a very special thank you to Susan Rowe for our theme music, the instrumental version of her beautiful song Mama's Eyes from her album Lessons in Love. I hope you found what you were looking for today: information, inspiration, or even just a little company. This is Roseanne Corcoran. I hope you'll join me next time in Daughterhood.